Mm. All right, thank you, Haley. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. It's great to be with you today. I want to share with you a little bit about what we're doing, and that is um, focusing on things that youth serving agencies such as schools, juvenile justice programs, after school programs, or any other kind of youth serving program can do to address the issue of bullying. And we've been hearing lately, a lot of requests have been coming in for this training topic. So it feels like it's an area of interest and need, particularly right now. And so hopefully I can share some information and resources with you today that will help you in this work in the area of bullying prevention. So thanks for joining. I'll start by a little introduction. My name is Amy Foster Wolferman. I serve as the Director of School-Based Training and Technical Assistance at the National Native Children's Trauma Center at the University of Montana in Missoula. And so I've been with our center since its inception in the early 2000s. Prior to that, I served as a special education teacher and I worked in an early childhood program in that capacity. I also spent time working in a middle school resource room and also for a teens and trails kind of program in wilderness areas in the Northwest. So Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. So I also worked for our state education agency in Montana, supporting schools in the implementation of positive behavioral interventions and support approaches. And during that time, I was trained in a bullying prevention program called Steps to Respect, and it was developed by the Committee for Children out of Seattle, Washington. You might be familiar with that program. They also developed the Second Step Violence Prevention Program. So both are very useful and they might be good resources for your programs. But many of the bullying prevention programs out there are similar. So I'll be sharing and drawing from approaches common across multiple models. My primary role at our center is supporting schools and other youth serving agencies in addressing the impacts of trauma on child well-being. So we do this through trauma-informed school approaches and practices, so knowledge and attitudes and understandings, as well as practical strategies that can be used in classrooms, and also through trauma-informed social emotional learning curriculum. And we've had the great honor of working with some trauma interventionists and practitioners in developing classroom-based curriculum. So I really see too how bullying prevention is related to trauma-informed work, as bullying itself can be a source of trauma, and a trauma can often be an underlying factor sometimes in why children may bully or why children are being bullied. So on a personal note, I am a wife and a mother of two young adults, both in their first years of college. My husband and I live here in Missoula, Montana, near my mom and near his siblings. We like to hike with our dog, play some golf. We have little mom and pop courses in the area we like to go to, and we're looking forward to doing some camping this summer up at some lakes. So I would love to be able to hear from all of you a little bit about yourselves, but in this short period of time and with the number of folks we have, we probably can't do that. But I would love it if you'd would be willing to share a little bit about yourself in the chat. So maybe who you are, where you're from, the setting that you're in, where you would like to address bullying, and then one thing that you're looking forward to this summer. So folks would be willing, we'd love to see in the chat a little bit about yourselves. And I'll start by opening. Oh, hello, Abe. Good to see you out there. Greetings, Roxanne. Thank you, Sheena. Welcome. Thank you, Jonathan. So as you're writing and sharing a little bit about who you are, where you're from, I'll move us forward and we'll continue to keep this chat line open. So thank you for jumping in. Hope everyone had a nice long weekend, just probably getting started after that little time off. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Adriana. Okay, I'm going to move us forward to share a little bit about what we're doing, hoping to cover. So in the time that we have together today, I'm hoping that we can reflect on our own experiences with bullying, also look at some definitions of what bullying is and what it is not, look at how bullying can impact those who bully and also those who are bullied, as well as how it can impact those who witness bullying, and then also explore some factors that contribute to and sort of perpetuate bullying. And then finally, look at ways that we can prevent bullying from occurring and also some ways that we can intervene or respond to it when it does happen. All right, so I'm going to start us off with a reflection. And with this reflection, I do hope that we can get some conversation going. So you can raise your hand after we go through these questions, if you feel like sharing, or feel free to write in the chat. But I just want us to think a little bit about what our own experiences with bullying, what it means to us as individuals. So some of these questions here, think about which ones might like to share. Was bullying something that you ever experienced in your lifetime? Did you ever get bullied? Did you ever observe others be bullied? Or maybe you even participated in some bullying. So if you did have some experiences like that, how did those experiences affect you? And how did adults around you respond? Did they know? So feel free to share, to raise your hand, to write in the chat. Any responses you might have to any of those questions. And thank you for continuing to introduce yourselves. Good to see everybody in there. Oh, great. I see a hand raised. Sheena. Can we unmute Sheena?
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for
Yeah, bullying was something that I experienced when I was growing up in middle school and high school. So yeah, that's something that I did go through and experienced.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing, Sheena. Yep. We're here to help those youth that we serve. And I think it's helpful to put ourselves back in the situations where sometimes we may have had experiences that we see our kids involved in these days, although it looks quite different than it can with technology. Anybody else want to share? Was bullying something that you experienced or witnessed in your own growing up? Yeah, we see some comments in the chat too about it, bullying being something that we experienced growing up. Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, yeah, it's probably something that many of us have experienced or at least witnessed. And I think we really do are here today to come together to think about the best ways to respond. I think it can be helpful to think back to responses that might not have been so helpful from the adults surrounding us. And I know with a lot of bullying that I witnessed and also experienced, the adults really were not aware. And I'm guessing that many of you felt experienced the same thing where it was just something that we didn't share or tell adults. And for many different reasons, and we'll go into that. But appreciate you taking a moment to just think about maybe how you experienced bullying in your lifetime. It's certainly something that persists from one generation to the next and can have some very serious negative impacts. And some people certainly do get through it okay, but some of us really do struggle. So I'm glad that we are coming together today to focus on this and talk about ways that we can help those that are experiencing bullying. Let's check the chat one more time. Thank you, Timothy, Andrea, Kayla. Thank you. All right. I'm going to move us forward. I appreciate you taking a moment to reflect. And we'll start with some definitions of what bullying is. And the definition of bullying first was formerly really researched by a Norwegian professor of psychology. You may be familiar with Dr. Dan Olweus. He did a lot of his work originally in the 1970s. He has a program that you might be familiar with called the Olweus Bullying Prevention Program. And it's really a model program for many others that came later. And the definition of bullying really hasn't changed much since that time period when a lot of that work was first happening. But here's one example of a definition. So bullying occurs when a youth or a group of youth target an individual repeatedly over time using physical or psychological aggression to dominate the one being targeted. So bullying is intentional. So the one who is bullying is intending to harm the other. It's repeated, so not just a one-time incident for the most part. It is one-sided, so meaning that the one who is bullying the other is always the one doing the bullying. The roles don't reverse. And bullying involves an abuse of power. So meaning that the one who is bullying is using things that they have in terms of making them more powerful, maybe being bigger, stronger, older, more popular, etc., over the one being bullied who might be younger or smaller or socially isolated, right? So kind of using that to their advantage. And this definition states that the target is an individual, but it can also be a group being targeted by another person or group, maybe a group of older kids or bullying a group of younger kids. And this definition is focused on youth bullying, but we do know adults can sometimes engage in bullying too. It certainly reduces over time from middle school era being the peak. High school, it reduces, and certainly as we get older, it becomes less and less, but adults certainly do engage in bullying behaviors too. The definition here also says that bullying acts are repeated. However, there's some exceptions. There may be a situation where several youths kind of turn on an individual and engage in some very hurtful acts. And maybe at a house party, someone is under the influence and a group does some harmful acts, maybe unwanted sexual acts, takes videos, posts them online, and the person is shunned by peers, rejected, and the impact is very, very difficult. Maybe they even attempt or take their own life. And this was not a repeated experience, but it was certainly done with the intention to harm. It was one-sided and it involved an abuse of power. So repetition isn't always necessary to make a situation bullying. I do want to point out here that what we really try to refrain from using terms that label kids, like bully or victim. So a child may be engaging in bullying behaviors for a time, but that doesn't mean they always will. And it doesn't mean that that behavior is the only behavior that defines them. And the same is true for the label victim. A child might be experiencing bullying for a time, but doesn't mean they will forever and always be a victim, or that they're a victim in every aspect of their current life. So we don't want kids to get stuck with labels that contribute to who they think they are and will always be, or to what others might think about them. So instead, we encourage focusing on the behavior that they're engaged in. So a child who is bullying, a child who is being bullied, and a child who's witnessing bullying, right? And please feel free to raise your hand if you have a comment or a question, or share in the chat. Okay. So you can categorize bullying into direct and indirect types. So with direct bullying, the instigator or the one who's doing the bullying does so directly, right? So they're not having someone do it for them. They aren't doing it behind other people's backs. With direct bullying, there's physical harm, so hitting, kicking, restraining. We might also see some destruction of property or engaging in unwanted physical contact, sexual contact. And all of this can cross that line into physical or sexual assault or harassment. Physical bullying is the easiest to notice, and it's the one that parents and caregivers tend to be most concerned about, but it happens the least. Verbal bullying is much more common. It can include teasing, name calling, making degrading comments. And I do want to point out here with teasing, there's certainly friendly, well-intentioned ways of teasing, right? And in some cultures and communities, teasing is somewhat of a tradition, really. But with that, we know that the intention is not to harm, but rather to show affection and connection and belonging. But it is important to be aware that even with good intentions, sometimes that kind of teasing can cross that line. So we may not realize it. It's just being mindful of that. There's also nonverbal bullying, making threats, gestures, invading someone's space, staring someone down, right? There's relational bullying, when someone tries to damage someone else's reputation and relationships, or tries to isolate them, which can be really hurtful. Humans we are relational creatures. We have a deep underlying need to be connected with others, and to feel like we belong. So this kind of relational bullying can be very damaging, especially for our younger upper elementary aged and middle school aged youth. Then with the indirect bullying, the instigator gets other people to do the bullying for them. So they may persuade someone else to physically assault their target. Verbally, they may spread rumors about the other without letting it known they were the ones to start the rumor. They can use social media as a platform for engaging in this indirect verbal and relational bullying, right? Otherwise known as cyberbullying. And this can be really hard to deal with because online the audience is much bigger, right? And whatever is being shared goes out and is received instantly. And when someone is bullying from behind a computer screen or a phone in private, they may feel more emboldened, right, to be meaner or more vicious, not realizing that their identity can actually be found out, although not easily. Um, I'm sure you've heard of youth creating false profiles of other youth, posting information that isn't real or true, having it appear that the person is saying or doing things that they're not, altering images of them. And this can be shared and seen by others and believed by others, and false impressions of the person can occur. And this can be really damaging to someone's reputation, right? And very difficult to alter over time. This happened to a relative of mine who ended up having to get police involved into an investigation where someone put a false profile of her up online and was making comments and sharing images of her that had been altered. And it took a really long time to figure out who to identify this computer. And she did go through a process of ended up going to court, but it took about a year and a half. So very, very difficult, damaging for her. She's a young adult. She's working. She has clients. She knows they saw some of these images. So certainly one example of cyberbullying. So it's important as part of bullying prevention efforts to include educating youth about the laws in their area and how something they decide to do that it might seem like an innocent joke at the time can actually end up in jail time and having a criminal record. So really important piece of that education. Another kind of indirect bullying is nonverbal, which can include things like exclusion, excluding people from a group, giving the silent treatment, playing dirty tricks, kind of behind their back and taking things behind their back. So many different forms of bullying. Not all of these acts by themselves are bullying, clearly, but in order for any of these to be considered bullying, they do have to include those conditions of being done with the intention to harm, usually repeated, one-sided, and having that imbalance of power. Right, so I'm going to pause here for a moment just to check in and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to share. Thank you for what you've been sharing in the chat. Yeah. Okay. All right. Move forward. So when we're talking about bullying, thinking about it, trying to understand it, it's helpful to think about the differences between bullying and just normal peer conflict. So with normal conflict, the conflict is happening between people who really share the power, right? There isn't one who has greater power over the other. The conflict might be happening between friends or acquaintances who might be similar in age, similar social status, or maybe they're not even that similar, but there's just not that power over. With bullying, one person or group has clear power over the other and uses that to intimidate the other. Normal conflict happens occasionally, whereas bullying is typically repeated. Conflict is accidental. Those involved really don't want the conflict to be happening. They want it to be resolved. And so, whereas with bullying, it is with clear intention, right? It was not accidental. With conflict, both parties usually experience similar emotional reactions. They might be both frustrated, upset by the situation. With bullying, the one who's being bullied will most often have a pretty strong emotional reaction, whereas the one who's doing the bullying has very little to no emotional reaction. They're not upset, they're wanting to cause upset to the other. With normal conflict, whoever instigates the situation is not doing so to seek that power over or to get attention from others or to seek material items. Instead, there's this typically maybe a misunderstanding or feelings about being spoken to a certain way they didn't like. But there's this sense that it can be cleared up. With bullying, the drive is gaining power over the other, to be in control, not just necessarily over the one being bullied, but general social control. So being looked at by peers as someone with power and status. With normal conflict, those involved might feel bad. They might feel bad that a relationship is in conflict or feel bad for something they said or did. With bullying, the one who bullies is not feeling remorse and not feeling responsible. In fact, they often blame the one that they are bullying for the situation. And lastly, here with conflict, the parties involved usually want to resolve the issue, whereas with bullying, the one who's doing the bullying has no interest in solving the problem. It's not viewed as a problem. They are actually getting the power and attention and control that they're seeking. So we'll take a look at some statistics. How common is bullying? The rate of bullying really ranges between kind of on the low end, about 14%, and on the higher end, about 30%. But that really does vary by age and setting, as well as how researchers are measuring the bullying. But you can see here some examples. One study showing about 19% of students experienced being bullied. These are nationwide surveys. A multinational study showing a higher rate of about 30%. Rates in middle school where bullying really does tend to peak, so upper elementary and middle school, look to be about 26%, and then much lower in high school at about 14%. Awareness of bullying occurring, so knowing that it's happening around you, experiencing it, witnessing it, was at 100%. And there have not really been many studies specifically looking at rates of bullying for American Indian youth. One study conducted by Campbell and Smalling in 2013 showed that American Indian students were reporting higher rates of bullying than other racial groups, although the study also said that this varied depending on the context, so including whether American Indian youth were a majority or a minority in a setting. And lastly here, youth involved in the juvenile justice system are significantly more at risk of engaging in bullying compared to their peers who are not involved in the juvenile justice system. And the researchers of this study are suggesting that adolescents engaged in delinquent behaviors are more likely to affiliate with peers who engage in similar behaviors, and they're likely to repeat those as a result. There are mixed studies about how bullying rates have changed over time. So according to an article published by the American Psychological Association in 2015, traditional forms of bullying over the last 40 years seem to have declined over time, whereas online bullying has increased. And I think probably a lot of us can sort of attest to that and maybe see how that has been true. So regarding different roles played in the context of bullying, um, we know that bullying does not happen just between two people. You know, there are most often others involved. So really about 80 to 85% of the time, whether it's digitally or in person, there are others involved. And so when a youth who is bullying is seen by others doing so, they're gaining attention. They're being viewed by their peers as having this power and control. And that's usually what is being sought after. Those involved include the one or ones who are bullying, right? It may be more than one person. And the one or ones who are being bullied and those who witness the bullying often referred to as bystanders. So of those witnessing the bullying, some are going to join in, some will support the one who is bullying, but not actually join. Some will simply observe but not engage. Some will dislike the bullying but not act. And others will try to help or say and do something. So there's a whole range of responses in terms of what others do, what different parts people play when bullying occurs. And so bystanders have a real strong influence over bullying. If the majority of youth who are present during bullying incidents allow it to happen, either actively or passively, they are contributing to the kind of this culture that tolerates and accepts bullying, which leads to a continuation of and potential increase in bullying. And there are a lot of reasons, of course, why a bystander in a bullying incident might refrain from trying to stop it or walk away from it, even though they disapprove of it, they don't like it. But for one, they may fear that it won't. If they don't go along, they may become the next target, or they may feel that if they tell an adult and those who are bullying find out that they told, they may become the target of retaliation. So, working to support bystanders in acting against bullying in safe ways can be a really powerful way to address it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to some strategies. So, kids very often don't tell adults when they're being bullied. There's some research showing that only about 24% of kids will tell their parents, and only about 14% will tell their teachers. They are much more likely to tell a friend at about 41%. And this can be due to feelings of shame, right, about being bullied, maybe feeling um, that it's my fault that I'm being bullied or that there's something wrong with me. That's why I'm being bullied. And commonly, kids just don't believe telling an adult will help, and that it could actually make it more, make the situation worse, which unfortunately is sometimes very true. Um, so, if we're not being told that it's happening, how can we tell? And there are some common signs, although not all children or youth will show signs, but it's important to be aware of what some of those are if we can see them. One thing we can do two is simply ask, right? Youth are less likely to uh, stand up and speak and take the initiative to tell that it's happening. Some will certainly, but others won't. But they're more likely to share if they're directly asked. So that's one strategy, is just keeping those lines of communication open and asking about their peer relationships and how those things are going. Um, so some common signs that we can be aware of, you can see here on this slide, we may start to see injuries that can't be explained, or loss or damage to material things, material items, books, clothes, um, electronics. We might hear complaints about feeling sick, so maybe stomach aches or headaches. And this can be due to the physical impact of stress and fear on the body. Or they may not really feel ill, but they're saying so as a way to avoid having to go to school or some other place where they're experiencing the bullying. They may experience sleep disruptions, nightmares. We might notice a change in appetite. Um, we often see a lowered sense of self-esteem, again, feeling some shame or like being bullied might be their fault. They may start to turn those feelings inward, that's lowered self-esteem inward, and engage in some self-destructive behaviors. And again, not all youth are going to show signs, so it's important that we keep those lines of communication open and directly ask. But those are some common signs of those who are experiencing being bullied. For those who are engaging in bullying behaviors, we also see some common signs. We may see an increase in fighting, whether it's physical or verbal fighting, that aggression. We might notice a youth hanging out with others who are bullying. Um, we may see an increase in aggressive behavior. Um, and with all of these kinds of behaviors happening, we might see an increase in discipline, whether it's at school or some other setting. So getting sent to the principal's office or to detention. They may have some unexplained new material items. We don't know where they've come from, money, electronics. You might see youth blaming others for their problems and not really accepting responsibility for their own actions. And we may notice a youth expressing um, more often some competitiveness. So, worrying about what others think of them, worrying about their reputation and popularity. So, some common signs, again, not all are going to show signs. So, why does bullying continue? What perpetuates bullying? A lot of studies suggests that the majority of children and youth who've been bullied, about 50 to 75%, have not told an adult. And um, some, particularly boys, may feel pressured to try to deal with the bullying on their own so they don't appear weak. Some youth fear being labeled tattletales or snitches by their peers. Many are concerned about possible retaliation by the aggressor if they do report. They might feel, especially when experiencing lowered self esteem, that no one really cares. So, why should I tell? They may worry that their friends will reject them if they know they're being bullied. Um, and they may worry that adults will make it worse. And sometimes they do. For example, um, a child might be punished for bullying, but then the situation isn't monitored and the after effects and potential retaliation happens. And so sometimes kids will be badly retaliated against and then never want to tell again. So our response is really critical in whether bullying continues or not, or telling of bullying continues or not, the reporting. And as a result, youth just are not telling adults that it's happening. And so our adults often don't know. And one of the difficulties with bullying is that it can become a vicious cycle. So the more a child is bullied, the more other children begin to reject that child. And then their self esteem decreases and they may feel more depressed or more anxious. And as children experience all of this, it can become harder for them to respond effectively to bullying, right? With these feelings of anxiety and depression and lowered self esteem, and social isolation to go along with that. And this leads to even more disapproval and avoidance by their peers. They can begin to feel like they deserve to be bullied, begin to feel really hopeless, which all leads to more bullying. And this is a really dangerous place for a child to be, having those feelings of hopelessness, lowered self esteem, and feeling disconnected from others. So, in the next few slides, I want to share a bit about some of the long term impacts of bullying on those who are bullied, those who engage in bullying, and those who witness bullying. So, for those who are bullied, we might see some different physical impacts. So, loss of appetite, stomach aches, headaches, loss of sleep. Emotionally, they might experience increased stress levels, anxiety, nervousness, depression, lowered self esteem again, loneliness. And they can even develop post traumatic stress symptoms because the experience of bullying can be quite traumatic. So we do see those traumatic stress symptoms with kids that are bullied. Not always, but it can happen. They may certainly experience academic impacts, right? They might avoid school to avoid the bullying that happens there. They might start to lose interest in learning and academic risk taking. And they may therefore have a drop in grades, and we might see more school dropout with that. Behaviorally, they may have more frequent trips to the school nurse. They may engage in self harm. And sadly, they may have thoughts of homicide or suicide. Youth who are bullied are at a higher risk for suicide. So, all things we certainly need to know and address to help prevent bullying from happening. What about those who engage in the bullying? Um, it also has this experience has a negative effect on the person doing the bullying. So with those who bully, we see increased externalizing problems such as conduct disorders, oppositional defiant disorders, internalizing behaviors too. We might see more anxiety. We see academic problems, school dropout. We might see those who bully can start to develop a negative reputation amongst their peers and start to experience some victimization by their peers. We also see increased substance use, increased engagement in criminal activity. So those who bullied were 5 times more likely to engage in criminal activity than their peers who did not engage in bullying. And we see continuous struggles with maintaining healthy relationships over the lifespan. So, including increased likelihood to abuse a spouse or a partner. Again, all things we know that we must help to prevent, right? And I think it's important to note that, with the situation of bullying where we have a child who's being bullied and we feel so much care and concern for them, and the child who's doing the bullying, we certainly want to intervene and apply consequences. And it's hard to accept that behavior because it's coming from a place that feels very hurtful. But we know that those who hurt are also hurting. And so, really thinking about these youth who are engaging in the behaviors, looking at why they may be engaging in these behaviors and how we can help them to shift the way that they interact with others and navigate through the world. So, developing empathy for all parties involved and trying to understand where they're coming from, what might be motivating them, and continuing to keep that compassion, even if their behavior is something we really do not approve of. So, even witnessing bullying can have negative impacts. Those who witness can develop feelings of helplessness, anxiety, depression. They might feel some guilt for not stepping in and helping. Along with that, they might feel some anger at themselves. They may feel anger towards the perpetrator of the bullying. They might be afraid that they could be the next one to be bullied. So when walking around in an environment where bullying is allowed to continue, not consciously, but we're intentionally, but we're culturally, we're just allowing this acceptance amongst peers for bullying to continue. It's really difficult to feel safe. So a lot of witnesses of bullying and those being bullied walk around in fear, whichever kind of program, whether it's a school or an after school program or a juvenile justice prevention program, whatever kind of youth serving agency, we can certainly have those feelings of fear and not feel safe. So, with that fear, we might be hyper focused on trying to spot and avoid bullying. And that makes it really difficult to focus on other things like certainly in school, it's more difficult to focus on our academic work when we're hyper focused uh, on the bullying that we're afraid that's going to be happening and we're trying to look out for and be aware of. So again, all of these things we know we want to work to prevent. So, what are some underlying factors that contribute to bullying? And there's some research shared by the National Academy of Sciences that came out in 2016. And looking at these different factors: individual, community, school, family, peers. And so, when you look at individual factors that can contribute to bullying, they found that youth who bully are more likely to have an active temperament, so higher energy, quicker to react, whereas those who are bullied tend to have more passive, quiet temperament. They also found that youth who are bullied are more likely to lack strong social skills, making it easier for them to be targeted. So, youth who use substances, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, are also more likely to be involved in bullying, um, as are those who are experiencing some mental health issues, such as depression, are more likely to be bullied. Those with a disability are more likely to be bullied. Those who identify as LGBTQ plus, also considered more likely to be bullied, as well as minorities, those who are considered minorities. So, it's interesting to identify these potential risk factors, but regardless of these common individual factors, anyone still can be bullied. So it's really important to know our own youth and our own programs and what the dynamics are between the different youth and peer groups that are happening. There are also some peer factors. So when youth are exposed to aggressive, violent, or delinquent peers, they're more likely to bully others, right? The behaviors being modeled. Their youth who are bullied tend to be socially isolated, and those we know who have at least one close friend are much less likely to be bullied, right? And youth who feel generally supported by their peers are less likely to experience negative effects from the bullying that they experience. So that the friendships and those connections really act as a buffer against these negative experiences. So really focusing on building these bonds of caring and connection and creating opportunities for youth to develop friendships and not allow youth to be isolated or excluded can be very powerful. In terms of family factors, having parents or caregivers that aren't very engaged seems to increase the risk that a child will bully, while having more closely involved and caring parents reduces that risk. When youth are exposed to things like parental conflict, use of drugs and alcohol, domestic violence, they're also more likely to bully others and also more likely to be bullied. There are also some research around the impacts of different styles of parenting, which can be a factor. So those youth whose parents use a more authoritative style of parenting, so one that permits independence but also sets those limits and boundaries and are responsive to their child's needs, are less likely to be involved in bullying. But youth whose parents are overly permissive and youth whose parents use overly harsh discipline tend to bully more. So the research has found that children have experienced abuse also are more likely to bully others and are also more likely to be bullied themselves. So just a few factors in regards to impacts of upbringing and family. In regard to school factors, we know that when youth have a sense of belonging to their school, they're less likely to be involved in bullying. And when staff at a school are aware of bullying issues, when they actively kind of supervise around behaviors and when they're quick to respond to bullying, we see a lot of less incidents. And then in terms of community, research has shown that youth from neighborhoods where they feel safe, where there's not a lot of violence, conflict, report, and also that report that they are known by adults in their community are less likely to be involved in bullying. So these findings are interesting and help us to see some underlying factors, potential underlying factors that can contribute to bullying, but we can't take that information and apply it to every situation, right? We don't want to be making assumptions with it. So just because a child's parents may have been involved with substances doesn't mean that their child is going to end up bullying or be bullied, or that every youth who is identifies as LGBTQ will be bullied, or that every youth with a more active temperament will engage in bullying, right? It's just identifying some um, underlying factors that they have seen a connection between these factors and later on bullying. All right, just want to pause to see if anybody has any questions or comments. Feel free to add some to the chat or to raise your hand. I'll just move forward to the next slide, addressing bullying in juvenile justice systems or settings. There's been quite a bit of research showing that youth who are involved in juvenile justice systems are more likely to engage in bullying, and stemming some of that from some of the different factors that we just reviewed. So maybe exposure to community violence or domestic violence, being influenced by peers, struggles with substances, whatever it might be. But once youth are in juvenile justice facilities, their exposure to bullying commonly increases. Um, but there are certainly things a program can do to prevent bullying, including bullying prevention education for youth and staff. And we'll look at some of those strategies here shortly. Additionally, supporting youth with underlying issues that may be driving the bullying behaviors, maybe some mental health issues, including traumatic stress symptoms, kind of issues with impulse controls or aggressive tendencies, lacking healthy coping strategies, supporting youth in developing those skills can really reduce some of that bullying behavior as well. So we can look at it in terms of universal approaches with education, but we can also look at more targeted and intensive supports for youth who may be struggling. Prevention and intervention strategies are really key to reducing bullying in any program. With juvenile justice settings, it may be offered within the setting, or it may be something offered by a collaborating agency as part of a youth case plan. Okay, so now we're going to have another opportunity here to do some reflection and sharing before we start looking at some different strategies, thinking about what we know works or maybe what doesn't work. So we're going to take a few moments to reflect on our own settings, whether you're in a school, whether you're in a juvenile justice program or some other child serving or youth serving agency. Think about some of these questions. Does bullying occur in your setting? If so, what does it look like? What forms of bullying are you seeing or hearing about? How do you know it's happening? Do you even know it's happening? Do you not know? What does your program do to prevent and respond to bullying? And is what you're doing having a good impact? Is it working? So, with those questions, I'll just give you a moment to think about those and feel free to share some of your responses in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to share verbally. I'd also like to add a question here. What is it that brings you to this kind of a presentation today? What's happening that draws you to wanting to learn more about bullying prevention? What's going on in your setting? Thank you. Okay, would anyone like to share? Okay, well, feel free to as something comes to mind, share in the chat or raise your hand when you feel like you'd like to share. Um, just want you to be reflecting on what's happening in your setting as we move into talking about some different strategies. All right, so we're going to shift into looking at some recommended strategies, and these come from a variety of different bullying prevention programs, most of them taking that whole program approach and working with all youth and staff rather than just singling out those who are involved in bullying. So it's a universal approach. One step is working to very intentionally to build bonds of caring, where adults in the setting are modeling caring for one another and for the youth in the program, which may seem very, very simple, right? But it's that creating a place where people feel seen and valued and like they belong and they're connected, right? So when the adults are modeling and sharing, they're expressing gratitude towards one another, towards the youth in the program. They encourage youth to be inclusive of others and create opportunities to build friendships and connections. Maybe they set up buddy or support systems to help youth who are new to a program to kind of settle in and make connections. So really working intentionally to create a sense of caring and belonging, right, can go a long way because we know those relationships really buffer from some of the harmful effects of bullying, but also other kinds of life adversities. And these kinds of environments are ones where people feel safe, right? Where bullying just is not tolerated. It's not accepted to treat one another this way. It becomes the norm that we engage in kind ways rather than harmful ways. And this requires developing, starting with that development of awareness of bullying. So another step is providing education to everyone, so adults and youth, about what bullying is, what it isn't, how it can impact. The more that we know collectively about bullying and its impacts, the more inclined we are to act, right, to prevent it from happening. And we also educate ourselves on what we can do to prevent and respond to it. And we'll go over some of that here in a few slides. So really developing that when we start to understand the long-term impacts of bullying, it starts to help us generate this sense of compassion for others, right? And in addition to trying to teach directly our youth some of those social skills like empathy, just that basic understanding and awareness of the impacts can be a part of that piece of developing empathy and compassion. So another strategy is conducting assessments about incidences of bullying. So adults very often, as we talked about, don't know that bullying is occurring. Youth don't tell, right? And it can be incidents of bullying can happen very quickly. Within a matter of 10 seconds, we can have different incidents occur. So it can be very subtle, it can be very quick, but they're more likely to share about bullying when given an opportunity to do so anonymously. So surveys can be really helpful. The information from surveys can help us identify where and when bullying tends to occur most frequently, as well as the different types of bullying that are happening, and this can really sort of drive our prevention and intervention efforts. Um, and so asking through these anonymous surveys, learning more about where, when, why, how bullying is happening, and then continuing to do so periodically so we can sort of measure over time whether what we're doing is having an effect and reducing bullying incidents. There is a great resource, stopbullying.gov, which has some good guidance around developing assessments related to bullying. Um, Another step is creating really clear anti-bullying policies and procedures. And so doing this demonstrates a commitment to that the organization has to engaging in efforts to prevent and intervene with bullying. And it provides guidance to staff in what to do. So here's kind of an example of an anti-bullying policy that includes first the definition of what bullying behavior is. It also describes how a program is working to prevent bullying, which might include training for staff and how to recognize and respond to bullying, teaching youth how to recognize, refuse, and respond to bullying. It can include procedures for how staff and youth can report bullying and how staff and youth can respond. So with reporting bullying, it's what kind of information, where to do it, what kind of information to share, how to react. Um, we can also outline a range of consequences for bullying, not just for those who bully, but also for those who encourage bullying. And a policy can describe a referral process. So some of our youth might need some additional layers or levels of supports that may be related to mental health supports or social supports. So outlining a way to what that referral process could look like. So in addition to policies and procedures, programs can clearly define and teach and also reinforce expected behaviors. What behaviors are appropriate and safe and acceptable and what behaviors are not. And the more specific that we get about these behaviors, the more well-defined, the more our youth are likely to understand those expectations. So when we're just using more general or vague or broad terms like be kind, be respectful, that can lead to some confusion and getting caught up in some gray areas. So the more specific, like keeping our hands and feet to ourselves or using respectful language with a list of terms that are respectful and other examples of terms that are not, that can really help clarify for youth what is okay and what is not okay. Um, and then with that, not just defining the expectations and sharing them as a list, but explicitly teaching what they look and sound like with examples and non-examples. So teaching all youth in a program what these expectations are very clearly, less youth tend to engage in inappropriate behaviors and more youth will notice when others are crossing that line and kind of saying something about that. And then with all of that, we really want to be noticing and acknowledging youth when they do engage in those appropriate and safe and helpful and kind behaviors. So we can use really specific positive feedback to notice that and provide that acknowledgement and validation and appreciation. That when we do that, it tends to have the impact of them engaging in those behaviors more so. Another way to help prevent bullying is to teach very specific social skills related to bullying behavior. So youth who bully and youth who are bullied often lack certain social skills. So some of those skills related to bullying include learning how to be empathetic, taking another person's perspective and thinking about how one's actions might impact others. There's also social skills around managing anger and general emotional regulation, controlling impulses and de-escalation strategies. What are some healthy ways I can cope when I feel like I'm about to blow my top, right? So teaching these kinds of skills. Also, social skills related to bullying include, being assertive, how to respond to bullying in an assertive manner rather than an aggressive manner, and being able to maintain my emotions in that moment. Using effective communication strategies, learning how to problem solve. So a number of different social skills that we can be teaching our youth in order to prevent bullying from happening. And there's some great curricula out there. One I'll mention again is the Second Step Violence Prevention Program. There's a lot of lessons for very young to all the way through high school aged youth. Um, and these social skills can be taught get universally in a program to all youth, but they can also be taught more intensively with some youth who might need that additional level of support, like a more targeted approach to additional teaching and practice. The other thing we can teach youth, those who are being bullied and those who are witnessing it, is how to respond to bullying. And we can look at it in terms of various levels of intervention, from low levels of risk to higher levels of risk, depending on the situation and the safety. Um, so, for example, if you recognize bullying is happening and it's safe to do so, you might use clear, strong words to say, you know, don't uh, don't do that, stop, then walk away and, in a calm manner, and then report it. Right. So some simple steps of how to respond. A low level risk might be simply to walk away and not say anything, but just disengage and walk away. Whereas a higher level of risk might be to stay and say something like, "We don't treat people like that here," or leave him or her alone. Right. So youth can also, another strategy for youth in response is to enlist the help of others, other peers who might be around who can peacefully together stand up, or even get an adult to help, right? So it's helpful to teach youth how to also to block rumors. So really to challenge those kinds of rumors that get spread and ask about where they heard that, why do they think it's true, challenge it, right? Um, and also to teach our kids the difference between, because tattling can be a reason why kids don't want to tell, they don't want to be a tattletale, but that difference between tattling, where you're trying to get someone into trouble, and telling, where you're trying to get someone out of trouble, right? So making that kind of clarification and difference. We can also teach and practice a variety of responses and help youth understand how powerful witnesses of bullying can be. So simply refusing to participate or walking away can shut down a bullying incident in a matter of seconds. Right. So with that knowledge, they can act and they can act together. Um, the last piece here is getting staff on the same page regarding how to handle reports of bullying. So we want to encourage staff to take all reports seriously, to respond calmly. We don't want to overreact. And there's a simple four-step response staff can follow called affirm, ask, assess, act. And with affirm, you're really letting the youth know that, hey, thanks for telling me that you were right to do so. Thank you for doing that. Then ask questions about, just to help better understand the situation. Tell me more about what happened. Has this happened before? Um, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Assess, then, excuse me, assess is the child's level of looking at the level of safety, right? What is it that they need right now? Can they go on? Can they leave this conversation and be safe, or do they need some support? And then act is really trying to coach the youth and what they can do, how they can avoid being in a situation like this, what they can do, where they can turn to for help when it happens again. So, kind of coaching through those different possible steps, and then letting them know what you will be doing next, so that they know what's going to happen. So, just a few examples. Here's some additional pieces, and one of them here is just really focusing on increasing supervision. So especially if we have done some assessment, we're talking with kids, we're learning, we're understanding, yes, bullying is happening, it typically is happening in this area, this time period. We can really work to increase the supervision that's happening there. Um, and so where we know that kids are more vulnerable. So youth are less likely to engage in bullying behaviors when there is an adult present who they know will step in. Bullying incidents can be difficult to detect, right? So the supervision is much more effective if it's active, meaning rather than standing in one place and simply visually scanning an area, looking for problems to help support with, it's moving around the area, it's also scanning visually, and it's frequently interacting with youth, right? And this is a great way to build those bonds of caring, those relationships, but it's also kind of lets your presence be known and felt, right? You're not just standing back and observing, you're a part of what's happening and you know what's going on. So active supervision. Um, we also want to take a look at administering consequences for bullying behavior, and with the goal of with consequences, really the goal is we want to teach youth more pro-social ways of interacting with their peers, and taking this disciplinary approach, discipline meaning to teach rather than simply a punitive approach. So with punishment, we're really looking at just stopping a behavior and not changing the outcome over time. So we want to add this layer of education. So part of a consequence could be reading about and writing a report on the impacts of bullying, engaging in acts of kindness, maybe reading stories to younger children, being put into a role of a sort of mentorship, repairing harm that's been done, any kind of restorative practice. And consequences are most effective when they're consistently used rather than delivering a consequence one time and letting the behavior slide another time. So really outlining what those sort of educational consequences will be, and then getting on the same page with staff about how to administer them, monitor. We can also engage youth in one-on-one coaching through bullying situations. And a lot of this comes from the Committee for Children's Steps to Respect program. Because of the nature of bullying, where one youth is perceived to have power over another, it's not really helpful to put the two together to work things out like a typical peer mediation, at least not during the period where bullying is occurring and the child who's being bullied feels unsafe, right? It's putting them in a vulnerable situation. So it's more helpful to work with the child who's being bullied and the child who's doing the bullying individually. So, coaching provides an opportunity for the child who is being bullied to share what's happened, to be listened to and heard. They can talk about what's worked and what's not worked in the past. And we can kind of lead them through a brainstorming of solutions session. So, how can they avoid the other for this time period? How can they speak up? What can they say? Who can they turn to for help during these situations? Um, can they arrange it so they're always with a second person when they're traveling from one place to another? Um, and then getting, a piece of follow through. So after having a coaching session with a child who's being bullied, following up to check on how things are going, and what we may need to do next, or if we need to provide some additional supports. When coaching the child who's engaging in the bullying, we can share what's been, we want to share that we know about what's been happening in a confidential manner. Like, we're not going to reveal the source, but instead we'll say something like, I've been hearing that. Um, and so we can get the conversation started and then provide an opportunity for them to share what's happened from their perspective, listen to what they're sharing. We also want a piece of reviewing policies around bullying, what our organization accepts and does not accept. And with that, when we do break those policies, what kind of consequences we would want to apply a consequence, and really want to do so in a calm manner, refrain from being angry or judgmental. So we want to, really work to support that child in changing their behavior and sort of express this belief that we know that they can do so. And then work with them to brainstorm solutions for what they can do differently next time. How can they avoid this kind of behavior? What was it that maybe they needed? How can they get their needs met in a more appropriate manner? And then after this coaching, we want to follow up with this youth as well. And some of our youth might need additional levels of support, right? So working with a mental health professional might be an added support. So really outlining that process for referral so that staff know how to do that, how to seek that external support. Okay, I just want to pause to see if there are any comments or questions at this point. And again, feel free to write in the chat or raise your hand. So the last thing I want to emphasize is with bullying prevention is the importance of incorporating promotion of resilience in our youth, um, really as a way to prevent bullying and other kinds of aggressive or kind of antisocial behaviors. We know a lot of youth engage in bullying because they've been hurt themselves. They've witnessed violence. They perceive that it can give them attention, power, control. They want to feel important, and believing inserting power over others is a way to do that. But we can show them other ways, and by building uh, skills in other areas, they're less likely to have the need for seeking attention in these more hurtful ways. So we want to empower those who are bullied or witness bullying to be able to handle situations effectively as well. So strengthening the 4 key protective factors that build resilience can help prevent bullying and support some better outcomes when it occurs. We know that when people have supportive relationships in their life, they are much less likely to be negatively impacted by bullying. It's kind of this buffer from that harm as well as from other life adversities. So, and people feel less of a need to use power over others to get their needs for attention met when they have these safe and supportive relationships and connections. It's fulfilling in that way. Having strong connections to community and culture can really support us in feeling that we belong to something greater, that we have a purpose and a meaning in our lives, and that we know who we are. We have this sense of identity, and we'll be less inclined to harm others, and be able to feel safe enough to stand up for ourselves, right? When we have that strong connection to something larger and something greater, and the sense of identity of who I am. So we talked already about teaching youth healthy coping strategies. So when we're able to regulate our emotions, control those impulses, communicate our needs, make good decisions, we're less likely to engage in harmful behavior and more capable of standing up for ourselves. And then the last key protective factor is developing a sense of mastery and strength, so that when we have activities in our lives where we feel like in control, there's something that we're good at and we enjoy doing, when we can accomplish things, this can really boost our self-esteem and our feelings of worthiness, right? So when we feel this way, we are less likely to feel that need to exert control over others, and also more likely to handle difficult situations effectively. So wherever we can think of ways to promote these key protective factors, we are really doing, it's also a part of an effort to prevent some of those bullying behaviors and those antisocial and aggressive behaviors. Okay, we're coming to the end. And so I just want to sum this up by saying, to prevent bullying, it really takes a commitment by a staff to come together and work intentionally to create environments where all of our youth that we're serving feel safe and supported, spaces where they know people care for them and where they will be protected from harm. So to protect our youth, we need to be aware of what's going on. We need to watch and listen and directly ask them, and then step in and intervene when we identify an issue. Along with that, we want to proactively and preventatively be teaching social skills and building resilience. And we can really only take all of this on and achieve this when we work as a strong team together. So thank you for your interest in this topic and for the good work that you do. The final thing that we have today, aside from time for comments, questions, discussion, is a evaluation. And I saw that Haley had put that up. I may be wrong, Haley, but I did see it kind of flash on the screen. There it is. I have a slide here with resources that might be helpful for you. the website for a number of different curricula and websites. And I also share here my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk further or have any questions. I'm very happy to connect with you via email. And I do want to open it up to via chat or unmute if you would like to share anything. So thank you for joining and participating.